live streaming now, so if you actually want to watch it while it was going on, you could. I started doing my daughter's volleyball, and like some of the parents that like can't make aren't at the game matches, like, oh, I love it. I'm like, well, I kind of had learned this from my school, so. So I was telling David, so the only one that happens, the iPad has frozen up before, so hopefully we won't lose content. I feel like every week so far we've lost some piece of the lecture, so.
Right.
Hopefully this time we don't. Appreciate you guys staying on top of your stuff. I looked at the grade book, looks like everybody's got where they need to be, so that's good. Today's content is, I don't know, just what it says, how to form a business. We're gonna walk through how different business structures protect you from different things and what structure is best for some things and that sort of thing. So, I don't know, it can be a little boring, I guess, for some people if you're not really thinking about being an entrepreneur. If you are thinking about being an entrepreneur, then I think you'll find it beneficial to learn, you know, kind of what some of the steps are. So we're basically going to lecture on 5, and then next week we'll lecture on 6, and the following week is our first exam. So I guess whatever it is, not next week, but the following, I'll lecture like from home or something, and I'll post the lecture up. You guys want to come to class at all, either group, Monday or Wednesday. And then I'll build that exam, which will be out there online basically. So I'll set up a time limit, whatever, and I'll push out an announcement when it's open and that sort of thing. So as far as work this week, we're just gonna do the Learn Smart. I've got a chapter 5 Learn Smart and a chapter 5 quiz, so no video or discussion boards or anything like that. And I don't think this content will even take us, all the way to the end of the period. So we're gonna take a little bit of a break, and we'll do a little bit of Learn Smart. We'll come up, finish up chapter 5 and get you out of here. So I imagine it'll go pretty quick. So, so we'll just jump in here. So right out of the gates, they talk about the different forms that a business can take. And sole proprietorship is the most common. It's really just when you're running your business under your own social security number. So you can be a business, and I can go out there and I can do, whatever I want, and I can just put all the money in my personal account, run it through my personal taxes, and I'm legal. Okay, that's a sole proprietorship. It's just, a lot of people get into it that way because it's easy. There's not extra forms they have to file, those sorts of things. We're going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of those as we go through here. A partnership now is where we said, you know what, a lot of law offices start as partnerships, doctors' offices. I started it, but now I'm going to bring you in, and we're going to be partners in this. Okay, and they can come in different structures, like an LLC, an actual master partnership, and then the third one, a corporation. Think of it like a living, breathing entity. So when you create a corporation, again, whether it be an LLC or an S corp, the federal government gives it a federal ID number. It's almost like birthing a baby, and you get a social security number, right? I mean, so it has its own unique ID number. It is a legal entity that can own assets, can pay out dividends, can do all those sort of things. And again, we'll talk about the pros and cons of these. But you can see from a percentage standpoint, the structure of business, lots of businesses are in this sole proprietorship. But if you look at the earnings, the sales, not near as big. So what all it's showing you is that there aren't a ton of corporations as it relates to people doing business as a sole proprietorship, but those corporations are doing the bulk of the sales and revenue and business. Does that slide make sense? Again, partnerships are a little bit unique. A lot of times, again, accounting, kind of specialty firms will be in partnerships. So let's talk about the benefits of a sole proprietorship. We already touched on the main one. The main benefit is it's easy. So I can get into business right now. If I want to be in the landscape business, I got a mower, I'm a business. So it's really easy. So, and therefore people aren't afraid of it. So a lot of times people don't want to do the other types of business because they are fearful of the extra steps it takes, or they feel ignorant, whatever.
It's a lot more startup too, in terms of.
Not as much as you would think, but we'll go through it, but that's a lot of what people think, and that's why they don't ever structure a organization. They think they have to get a lawyer involved, they think they have to do a lot of these steps, and it's not near as difficult as people think. Again, the other big thing with sole proprietorship, there really isn't another layer of taxation. That income is just flowing right through your personal taxes, so your whole business return is really inside your personal taxes. So there's not a whole nother layer of taxation that people have to worry about. They feel like they own it. So those are the main things that people like about it. The disadvantages, the really big one is the unlimited liability. So if you start your mowing business and you buy a mower and you're out there mowing and you're collecting receipts, it's flowing through your taxes, you're legit, 5 years in, you're still mowing, but you've never created a standalone organization, and you drive over and kill a baby, they could take all the money out of your organization revenue, but they can go after all your personal assets as well. So there is no difference now. So you can have a business checking account and be like, look, I've got $30,000 in there, and you can sue me and take my $30,000. They'll be like, well, what's your retirement account, and your personal account, and your wife's account? I'm taking them all. So that unlimited liability is why people then ultimately end up forming some form of a legal entity. The other problem with it, banks often want to be very hesitant to lend you money if you don't have a legal organization formed. You know, you're coming with this business plan, you want to be all this, and I'm going to give you $20,000 to help you get there. But how do I know you're just not buying groceries with the $20,000? Because it's kind of all in the same account. There's no real checks or balances. Banks don't really like to do that. Limited lifespan. A lot of times, if you're a sole proprietor, and I tell people in my entrepreneurial classes I teach, if you have a business that won't run unless you were there, you don't have a business, you have a job. So a lot of times sole proprietors, they think they're in business for themselves, but really that business was going to stop the day they stopped doing it. So there really isn't a succession plan. There isn't the ability to sell the business later, because really the sole proprietor is the business. And that's one of the downsides. It's also why the banks don't necessarily like it as much. Okay? So partnerships, typically in a partnership, you and your partners share in the profits, and you also share in the liability. In a partnership, however, your liability is only equal to what you put into the company. So your personal assets are protected, unlike a sole proprietorship. But whatever I have risked to get into the partnership is at stake to be lost. General partnerships, again, a lot of doctor offices, accounting things, those sorts of things, where one or two people come together. They are the business. Maybe your law is maybe defense, and my law is bankruptcy. We form a partnership, and everything flows to the business, and we share in the risk and the profits. So a general partner is the one that's actively managing it. It might have unlimited liability. A limited partner now is more common. Most of the time, you've got limited partners that come together and they invest their money in business, and they're limited to basically the liability of those debts, so their personal assets are protected. That's usually how these the partnerships work. Master limited partnership, get a slightly different taxation form, and a limited liability partnership where we're trying to just be at risk of what we've invested. So what are the advantages of a partnership? The big one that people come into partnership is the whole shared level of expertise. I touched on the lawyer side. You're practicing defense, I'm practicing bankruptcy. Or on the medical side, you treat these sort of patients, I treat these sort of patients. But everybody, but we wanna have a kind of one brand, you know, one facility for people to come to, one-stop shop sort of thing. So a lot of times we're creating partnerships to gain the expertise of somebody else. That's the main reason. And because of that, then you have the banks like you a little bit more than they would a sole proprietorship. Depending on where you're at in the partnership, if you're the general partner, you could have unlimited liability. But again, most people have protected themselves to be limited partners. The biggest problem with partnerships is the whole disagreement amongst partners. If I'm a sole proprietor, it's my gig, we're doing what we wanna do, and I don't have to worry about getting along with anybody or playing nice with anybody. If I'm in a partnership, now all of a sudden, you know, I think we should grow, and you think we should get smaller, and I think we should open a second space, and you don't, and, okay, we have those disagreements.
So what are the, excuse me, I've seen a couple times up there that you have tax advantages with partnerships versus corporation.
I don't know, the partners, let me cover corporations, we'll come back to the taxes of all the different types of models. Partnerships, really, your taxes are just gonna flow down to you personally, just like a sole proprietorship.
Okay.
So there isn't another layer of taxation. Corporations, there can be double taxation, so we'll go into that when we get done with the corporation slide.
Right.
How do you pick your partner? The problem is a lot of our partners in some businesses start from family members, whether it be because we formed a partnership or whether we brought in a family member into our corporation. But you gotta be real careful, obviously, and so just giving you some ideas so I wouldn't necessarily look at this as how to pick a partner as much as who do I bring in to any business that I'm forming. You know, these are things you should be thinking about. All right, so then let's get into corporations a little more. So again, legal entity, and we formed some paperwork, and we've registered it with the state and the feds. And whether we are a S corp, a C corp, a lot of different types of them, and I'm not sure how far they're going to take you into this, but the advantage there is I think there's an advantage slide right here. The advantage of the corporation side is the protection of your personal assets. So I can be an owner of this corporation. The corporation goes out and does something horrible like BP spilling oil or whatever, and my only risk is up to whatever I've put in as an owner of that company. I bought 10 shares of BP stock. BP stock goes bankrupt, I lose all that money, but they can't ever come after me or my personal assets. So you can imagine if you're a venture capitalist and you're a millionaire and you're wanting to invest in different entities to try to make some money, well, you would want that protection, right? I don't want to invest in your startup XYZ company and risk my other $10 million I got sitting over here. So that's the main thing, is your liability is protected. That's that limited liability. Because the ownership is now, whether you're doing it in stock shares or percentages in an LLC, it's very easy to divide up the ownership of the business. So all you do basically is you come up with a number that you think the business is worth. That number is typically driven by market value. So I think the business is worth, you know, $1 million, and you think it's worth $100. Well, you're not going to buy into my business, and no one else is. So eventually, I'm going to come down off my $1 million to a spot where I can actually get someone to put capital into the business, and that ends up being what really drives the share price. So if we finally settle out and the market says the business is worth $100, I could say I want to issue 100 shares. I could say I want to issue 200 shares of ownership stock, and I can do that. I can do that privately between us three, or I can do it on the public exchange, which is a whole nother step we'll get into. But what all I'm driving at is people often put too much weight in the share price. It's $86 a share. Oh man, that's great. It really doesn't mean anything because they decided how many shares they gave. So, back to my $100 business is worth $100, and I issue 100 shares. How much is each stock worth? $1. Yeah, $1, right? If I just issue $200, each share is now worth 50 cents, right? So the share price doesn't matter. Now, if the share price is going up, I bought it at 50 cents and now it's worth $1, that means something. Now the company's worth more than it was when I bought it. Okay? So one of the values of having a corporation is it's very easy to put additional capital back into business. Okay, so we have 100 shares, and I bought 51 of them. You bought 10, and you bought 10. Okay, and somebody else bought the rest. And now we want to raise money again. Okay, we sit and we say, okay, well, company is now worth this, so we're going to issue more stock, or do a stock split. Okay, so my current owners get more stock, but we can issue more stock, and people can buy back in again. And it's just so it's an easier way for capital to come inside the business. And again, capital is different than loans. Banks are going to come in and loan you. They still want to do business with you better than a sole proprietorship too, because you have the structure. You probably have a business plan, a board of directors. You're a little more formal. So the ownership change is pretty easy. I mean, it's fluid, right? I mean, in theory, the reality is the family that starts the organization usually holds on to a lot of the stock, but even Walmart, right? Sam Walton used to own all the stock, and his family did, his brothers and sisters, and his kids, but it's been around so long now that it's gotten so divested that ownership is almost fluid. Whoever's buying and selling the stock, parents can die, leave it to their kids, and they're an owner of the business now just because they have those shares of stock. That perpetual life, again, board of directors, managers, owners. So now it's not just a single employee that gets hit by a bus and the business is done because there's no structure to it. Corporations have that structure. It's going to make it more, it's going to facilitate the growth and the long-term stability. All of that allows you to attract employees. Again, you're a sole proprietor. Hey man, come to work for me. Okay, what's the business name? Well, it's Kyle and Company. Okay, it's like, well, are we structured? No, not really. I'm just going to pay you. Okay. Versus, I want to really recruit talent, and they want to see the whole business plan. They want to see the pecking order, the leadership, who's in charge. Okay, all that. Separate from ownership from management. Again, because ownership can be fluid. Now, I can be a manager. So that's when you get stock options, come to work here, you could be an employee, and I'm going to pay you a wage, but I'm also going to give you stock options. And what that really means is you have the option to buy stock at a set price, and usually that set price is cheaper than what the market is. So, so you have an incentive to drive the stock price up because you're going to make money. And but typically ownership is separate from management, and so it gives accountability, checks and balances. This is kind of what we just walked through. This kind of the typical checks and balances. So the owners, so if we have 100 shares of stock out there, we have 100 owners. And we're going to create our board of directors. Those owners typically vote on who's going to be on the board of directors. We nominate some people, they're voted in. Those board of directors now say, okay, let's say there's 8 of us. One of the first things we need to do is kind of hire a CEO. So then they're out actually doing the interviews and hiring the people, and with that CEO, then they're setting the strategies going forward. CEO then might hire others and on down the line. So hopefully you can see how that's different than a sole proprietorship. I mean, the sole proprietor, that's one dude. Here's some of the biggest companies out there. Private companies just means that there's still shares of stock. They're just not trying to trade them on the public stock exchange. So the whole process is exactly the same. It's just, I'm not trading mine out on the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ or whatever. I have shares of stock. I have a valuation for all those stocks, meaning my stock might be $37 or whatever. It's just the people I'm selling them to are private. They're either individuals, private equity firm. I'm not out there trying to sell it to the average Joe over the stock exchange. Okay, do you understand the difference? Okay. Disadvantages of corporations. There is some cost. Again, you're really registering a legal entity with the government, so you'll have some costs, but they're not near as high as you might think. You might have to get some, like an operating agreement, but again, places like LegalZoom, sometimes you can just Google free operating agreement, you can get a Word document and start filling stuff in. The biggest negative is the two tax returns. So, because the organization is a living, breathing entity, it has its own tax return just like you personally do. So what happens is the business does its income statements, generates whether it made a profit or not, and files its own tax return based on those profits and pays its taxes. Okay? Those profits then, after taxes are paid, those profits are distributed to the owners in the way of dividends. If we've got a bunch of shares of stock, if it's just you and I, then whatever our ownership percentage is, you get 60% of that profit and I get 40% of the profit. That profit then flows to our personal tax returns as income, and we pay taxes on it again. Okay? So the real downside of the corporation is what they're calling that double taxation. Now, that's really only for the large corporations. You can do, I'll assume there's slides on LLC coming up here next. Yeah, they're gonna get us into some of the other types of corporate, yeah, okay. So we'll talk more about that as we get through these other types of corporations. And then the other disadvantage I would say that, is it can get a little bureaucratic. You start getting a true board of directors who want to say in everything, and then you've got a leader who's really trying to run an organization and be a leader, and he's got to always check with the board of directors, and yet the board of directors, maybe there's a whole array of owners that the board of directors are trying to keep happy, so it can get a little bit bureaucratic. It generally isn't that way though, because generally speaking, some owner has 51%, so he gets to put the board of directors in that he wants, they're his people, and those board of directors hire who is a leader, the guy that he wants to have hired as a leader. So generally there isn't that bureaucracy, but it can happen. Yeah, it's just giving you some, business failures. I love the Blockbuster one. I didn't know they had a chance to partner with Netflix. I'm listening to a book called Blink. It's by Malcolm Gladwell. He just went into deep detail of the whole new Coke taste test and all that stuff. You remember when the new Coke came out?
Yeah.
So new Coke. So basically what spawned it was Coke and Pepsi were doing a head-to-head taste test, and Pepsi was beating them. And beating them so badly that like the Coca-Cola management freaked, and they're like, we gotta come out with a new Coke formula. So they came out with a new Coke, and all the traditional Coke people freaked out, because they thought they were gonna take away the traditional Coke flavor. It's like a complete disaster. So like I said, 77 days, they pulled it back off the market. So what Malcolm Gladwell went into was, he's like a statistics guy. He debunked the whole taste test. Basically, the testing methodology is not appropriate, because in a short sample taste test, head to head, certain characteristics of the flavor of Pepsi win. But if you do a take-home test and people have to drink the entire can, then it evens back out. but because they were reacting to just a head-to-head sip it sort of thing, they were overreacting to the data basically. So if they really would have known more science behind it, they would never would overreact, and never would have made it go, never would have had the embarrassing whole thing that it was. Touch on this, stock is issued to the outsiders. We touched on. So it says here, possible tax benefits. Some of the ways that you can get some benefits in a corporation is you can legally have the corporation provide benefits, perks to you as an employee. So I can be an owner of my business, have that business maybe provide me a company car, provide me health insurance, and do all that with pre-tax dollars legally. And then now my net income in the business is less, but that's okay, because I was gonna pay taxes on that income anyway. And so that's, some people call them loopholes, but there's legal ways for you to pay things out of your corporation that are legal, that make your daily life easier and better, your computer, things like that. And those are ways to get some tax savings. So an S Corp, C Corps are the real big ones that the Walmarts of the world. But a lot of people wanted corporations without the whole double taxation issue. So the government comes up with what they're calling an S Corp, which is really going to tax more like a limited liability company or a partnership or sole proprietorship. And what that means is I can still have shareholders, I can still have shares in my business, and I can have the protection of limited liability. But all that happens is when we still do an income statement for the business, and it creates what would be our income for the business. But instead of having to actually file a return on that income is just passed through to the owners, and the owners put an additional page in their tax return that says this was corporate income. It's called a K1, or it's a different form name from an LLC. But that money comes, or their percentage of that profits comes over their personal return. And it's just to try to avoid that. It's the government created it to try to avoid that double taxation, so that businesses can still have all the protections and structure of an S Corp, but not have the double taxation. So again, can't be huge. So can't have more than 100 shareholders. So again,
For small businesses.
well, yeah. So it's still catering to small businesses. And the next slide is going to be about limit LLCs, and LLCs are really trying to accomplish the exact same thing. They came after an S Corp. Only one class of stock. In a real big corporation, I can have preferred stock, and missing the right word. The next stock that it's not limited or basic, but it's like a step down from preferred, so you don't get as many voting rights. So in big corporations, I can have all that kind of stuff different. In S Corp, I can't. But the one that a lot of people are doing now are LLCs, and so most of the companies I've been starting, in the last 5 to 10 years, have been an LLC, and it just stands for limited liability company. It's very, very similar to an S Corp, and it allows you to have multiple owners, and all you have is an operating agreement amongst those owners, and those operating agreements, again, you can get them off LegalZoom and or Google it. Gives you the limited liability protection that you're talking about, but it's very easy to form. Doesn't necessarily have to have the whole board of directors and all of that stuff. So, in essence, I could have a limited liability company already, or we could go start one tomorrow for, maybe $100. Okay, and we could go online and get us an operating agreement that would say you're gonna do this, and I'm gonna do that, and you own this percentage, and I own that percentage. And if we hate each other, we're gonna do this, and if we, we wanna close down, we're gonna do that, right? You just write that stuff out ahead of time. So very, very simple and clean, and then whenever the business is profitable, whatever profits you have, based on our ownership percentage will just flow through our personal returns again. Okay? There isn't stock, so I can't sell out my stock. It says the ownership is not transferable, but it really kind of is, because typically in your operating agreement, I would have a methodology for buying you out. So before we even started, I would say, look, if I want you out, or you want me out, here's how we'd have to do it. So in theory, I could buy you out and then add someone else back in. Okay, so you can still get different owners, but limited lifespan, I mean, you're not gonna do an LLC if you think you're gonna become the next Walmart. But if you're starting a small business that you wanna have some structure, some legitimacy to, but yet I don't necessarily need a board of directors and, be able to go public, it's a great vehicle for getting that done. Mergers and acquisitions are really, really similar, so those terms can almost be used interchangeably. Acquisition is more of a, we bought you and we took you over. We own you, kind of a more of an aggressive sort of cultural thing that we're taking you. Mergers are more, hey, you're a value, we're a value, let's come together and kind of make a new company out of our two holes. Same concept. Again, vertical merger, horizontal merger, you don't use those very often. Kroger buying farms, like we're in the grocery business, and now, you know what, instead of buying our milk from these stables, we actually buy that farm and make our own milk. Okay, vertical merger. And then horizontal will be the other way, buying out of competition. And a conglomerate merger is really a diversification. So I'm in this business, and that business is seasonal or risky or whatever, so I need to diversify. So I'm actually gonna get into this business over here too. You see GE does that a lot. So GE had the appliance business, then they had like the airplane engine business, then they were in the financial services business, insurance, very unrelated, but they're into those to diversify.
So like Blue Ocean.
What's that?
Blue Ocean. Blue Ocean's like the term, it's like going to a new market that's not related to yours, but you're still, you can be successful because nobody's there.
Yeah, nobody's there, yeah, for sure, and especially if it is somehow connected to like your own internal strengths as your business. And so the only reason it'll be a merger then is instead of starting from scratch there, I'm gonna go to that blue ocean you're calling it, but I'm gonna buy someone that's already there. Okay. Leverage buyout, you'll hear these in the movies quite a bit. We talked about issuing more stock, bringing more capital into business, and now let's say we actually get to a spot where I don't own 51% anymore. In fact, I own like 26%, but I used to be the owner, and no one likes me anymore. So now they start working on getting 51% of the shares themselves to take control over the organization. And all it took was like my brother to sell out because he had 16%. You know what I mean? And so you see it in the movies that way. That's all I was talking about. It doesn't happen that often. We sensationalize it because it's pretty aggressive, sort of thing. Franchising we do see a lot of, very common. Some people think it's the down of the whole world because you go to you travel to a different city and you're like, dude, am I in the same city again? Because it's all just the same franchises up and down. But the franchisor is the person who has the original idea. So they're the person leasing, selling the concept to a franchisee. Okay? Forever I would get so confused with or and e's, less or, less e. Less or is the guy giving the property, less e is the guy renting the property. Franchise or the guy who's selling the idea, franchisee the one that's taking it. What do we like about franchising as a business model and ownership structure?
It's cheaper.
Okay. Might not need quite as much capital up front. Still can be more expensive than say a sole proprietorship or starting your own business, because typically you'll have some sort of buy-in fee from the franchisor. But it can definitely be cheaper than developing all of your own. What else?
Already established.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing, right? You have an established brand, kind of an established way of doing things. I don't have to learn all that by trial and error and making mistakes and figuring it out. What don't we like about franchising?
You can't really make it your own. You
Yeah.
can't follow the rules.
Yeah, you gotta kind of follow theirs, so you don't really have complete control over everything. You have to kind of follow their recipes and procedures. And the big one is you gotta give up a cut of your money. So your royalties, I have a guy I know that's had a business very similar to my nonprofit. His was a franchise. And he's like, the first year or two was probably worth it, but he's in year 10 and 12 now, and they're taking these royalties from him the same, and he's like, I don't get anything from them. There's just no value for me, and yet I'm locked into this. So. Lower failure rate, we didn't mention, but should be mentioned as an advantage with franchising. They fail less often as opposed to just starting your own from scratch. And then it is a little bit easier to raise money as a franchise. Why? Because the banks want to know there's a structure, and the whole concept of franchise is, yes, I have a structure. In fact, I have to do the structure. And that makes bankers feel comfortable, and so they're a little bit more willing to lend money. So again, large startup costs, it depends on what you're comparing it to. But if you were just gonna start your own business in the backyard for $100, you can't do a franchise for that, so it'll be a lot more than that. But if your franchise involves, property and some other technology that you would have to buy, then it might be better. The whole regulations, coattail effects, initially you might be riding on the franchisor's coattails, but like I talked to my friend, now 10 years later, they're riding on his, because he's got an established business. They're not doing any brand extension or marketing or anything for him, and now they're riding on his coattails. Fraudulent franchisors, they can rip you off, obviously, but the other one that's not on this list that just popped in my head is, the other problem with franchising is if you get a bad franchisee, and or several of them, and they begin to ruin the brand, you're penalized even though you had nothing to do with it. So think like, didn't Chipotle had like a scare with some of their meat or whatever, and it might have been like the actual franchisee not preparing the meat properly, but now I'm a franchisee in Texas, and no one will leave my place because it's hit the news, so that's a risk you have. Well, they're just making a point about women and minorities making an effort to become franchise owners. Franchisors are, they're salesmen, right? So they're trying to tap every market they get into, because they're trying to grow, and the way they're trying to grow is to get people to buy their franchises. Well, if we can change our marketing literature and our structure to try to entice women or minorities or people with 3 fingers, I don't care. Let's get them let's sell them a franchise, right? That's how they want to grow. Home-based franchises, no different than reasons why we enjoy working from home as an employee. There's some advantages from working from home. There's some disadvantages to the isolation being when I work from home, and there's days I won't talk to anybody all day. My first adult comes home like, oh, those are the first words I've uttered out loud. Interesting. Working from home, you also can have trouble like turn it off. you know, like when you work at a business and you go there, and when you leave, you know you're permitted to like leave it there. In fact, you're encouraged, leave it there, I'm coming home. When you work from home, you're like, well, I got 45 minutes here, should I clock back in and do some stuff? So it kind of gets, I've been doing that for a long time. E-commerce, again, happen all the time. I mean, from people buying and selling playing cards through eBay. I mean, they're in business right now, right away. And then, you know, you can get the whole, put your stuff in, or put their ads on your web page, and it clicks that way, so. Just an example here. Again, I already mentioned that the franchisor is looking to grow. They're looking to sell their franchises anywhere they can. Well, obviously, when they look at a place like China or India, there's billions of people, they're going, let's try to sell some over there. So we gotta change our menu, change our franchising agreement, whatever we gotta do, because we need to sell some in there. And so then they start selling franchises internationally. Top performers, I'm surprised that Anytime Fitness is up there. I mean, I do like their idea though, but I just like there's so many fitness places that how do you differentiate? Cooperatives, again, don't see them a ton, but farming community is the easiest one to see them in. The hardware stores like HWI, I think even Ace might be close to a cooperative, where the individual store owners of like HWI hardware are also the ones that own the actual HWI name and the distribution channels and all that. So cooperatives are, in the farm world, it's, you know, we might have a co-op that we buy all of our fuel from, because we all know we're gonna need fuel. But if I buy my 50 gallons separate from your 50 and separate from yours, we don't get as good a price. If I buy 150 gallons together, we're gonna get a better price, so we're gonna form a co-op. That's where you see it the most, is in the farming. Okay, just pooling our resources, who has similar needs. All right, let's take a quick break here. It looks like the slides might be close to being done here. I want to go back to the book and make sure we didn't blow past something. So we'll take a break. I'm going to shut this off, and then we'll come back. Oh, great. Looks like it locked up.